So today we're going to be starting functions. All right. All right. So what is a function? A function can be thought of as a named and stored code block that runs only when it is called. So this is a piece of code that we want to be used repeatedly, but it also has particular functions and particular ways in which it can be utilized. So how this is different from a loop is that it can have a variety of inputs. So it can be used for performing a specific function on different types of inputs. So functions are defined using the def keyword, def, and then functions can optionally accept inputs called parameters, which I was talking about. Then we have functions return data to the caller. So this data is the data that will be returned after the parameters have been used, the inputs have been used. We've actually already used built-in functions throughout the course. So print is an example of a function because it takes in something in its brackets, which is the input. So when we put in the input inside the print bracket, it prints out that exact statement. Similarly, we used str to convert whatever is passed as a string. And similarly for int, we used it to convert things to an integer. So let's look at an example of how we can make our own function. So defining a function. Functions are declared using the def keyword, followed by the function's name, then parentheses and a colon. The code that defines the function, aka the function body, is indented underneath the function declaration. Parameters, if present, are defined within the parentheses of the function declaration. These parameters can then be used within the function definition. So I said a lot of words, right? And so for these to make sense, I'm going to be switching over to PyCharm to show you guys a demo. Um, New share PyCharm. Okay. So let's create two variables. Let's call them A. Actually, we don't need this. We can just go to define. So this is the keyword, right? So let's make a function called add nums. So this will take in two numbers. So let's call them A and B. And then we add these together. So return A plus B. All right, so this is a very easy function. Oh, wrong syntax, sorry. Yeah, so it uses a colon like this and not curly brackets. So yeah, so this is how you define a function, right? So what this function will do is when I call it, so right now it won't do anything. This is just the definition of the function. So how I use the function is I have two new variables. Let's call them C and D. Right? So now if we do, let's say F is equal to uh, add nums C comma D. All right, so now if I try to run this piece of code, we get 6, which is the sum of 2 and 4. So I can show you guys how we got here, as I always do. So let's try to make the annotate boxes. So in this, we have to look at two different things, right? Sorry, one second. Yeah. So we have some global variables, right? We have some global variables. So global variable means that these variables were defined outside a loop or a function, right? So C and D are global variables, right? Because they can be used everywhere in the code. So C is 2, D is 4. As of now, A and B are simply variables, but we don't have values for them because we never calculated this. This is simply the definition of the function. So if we, so this did nothing. So this didn't create a box. This didn't do anything, right? When we get over here, what happens is we get another global variable called F, right? Now it takes the values of C and D that we pass to it over here, and it goes back up and it puts it in A and B within that function, right? So this is within that function. We can't use the values A and B outside the function. So in this function, within this function, we have A and B, right? So A takes the value of 2 and B takes the value of 4, which was passed to it through C and D over here. Then we add these values over here. That gives us a 6, right? And then this value is returned. So the return value goes to F, which is being equated right here, right? So we get 6 over here, and that's how 6 is printed out. So does everyone understand how we write a new function, like an arithmetic function at least? Is there any doubts? Yes. Is there a particular part you can unmute yourself and ask if there's a particular doubt? Otherwise, I'll repeat the entire thing.
Okay, may please just go over like here we put A and B and then C, D. I didn't quite get that.
Okay, I can repeat that. So you don't understand basically how A and B and C and D are different, right?
Yes.
Okay. So let's try to understand this, right? So there's something called scope, right? So when I was saying global variable, that's that variable's scope. So when something is right next to this line, when it is not indented, right, then we call it a global scope, right? So what that means is that any function, sorry, any loop can use these except for, sorry, these are not global, but these have like a, these have the widest scope, right? They can be used outside and they can be used inside loops as well, right? But they can't be used inside functions because inside this function, only A and B are defined over here because this is how we're defining the function. This keyword changes that. So we can't use C and D, even if it was defined above this function, we can't use these values inside the function. I mean, we can use these values, but we can't pass any values to them. So over here, what we're doing is we're giving this function over here the values that C and D carry, right? So when we do add nums c comma d, what actually happens is it goes back to the definition of the function, and it gives those values to a and b. It evaluates everything inside this indentation, right, inside the function. And as soon as it evaluates everything, it returns the value required to this, whatever was being equated with the call for this function. So get the difference between a call for a function. So this is a call, and this is a definition, right? So what is a definition in English, right? It is a way that we describe something. So this is how we describe the function, and this is how we use the function. Does that make sense? Hopefully.
Kind of. Thank you.
Yep. As you use functions more in your own codes, it will become clearer. And as I show you more codes today. So let's go back to our functions presentation. Oh, oh, this is the wrong slideshow. Um, can everybody see the presentation?
Yes, we can see it now.
Okay, thank you. So defining a function has been done, right? So the definition of the function was the top part that we did. That was you write def, which means define, then the name of the function. Then in parentheses, you write possibly one variable, zero variables, or two or three variables, depending on how many parameters that function has. You can have as many as you like. And then these parameters can be used to describe what the function will do. For example, if it is addition, we have two parameters, and then we're adding those two parameters, right? So this is another function. So define my function. So my function does not have any parameters. It has empty parentheses. So all this function does is print hello world. So let's try out this function as well, right? All right, so we're defining a new function called hello world. This function neither returns anything nor does it have any parameters. Please note that, because neither of those are sorry, hello world, not values. So neither of those are things that are important for a function, but those are the usual necessary functions for a function, if that makes sense. So in the function above, we were trying to add something, right? So if we're trying to add something, we need both inputs, the things that we're adding, and then we need an output, which is what the sum will be at the end. But if we just want to create a function that will print out a particular line, then we don't need either the input, because there's no specific input for this, nor do we need a return statement, because we're not returning anything in a variable. We're simply printing it out in the first place. So the way we will use this function, the way we will use this function is to simply call it like this. And when we run this code, sorry, we get this hello world, right? So hopefully now it's clearer how functions are working. Or do you want me to repeat this example? Okay, I don't see anything. If you do have any doubts, please let me know in chat. Let's do the other examples. So we had another version of this function called, so we're gonna print hello, then put a curly bracket here, right? So with this curly bracket, what we can do is we can replace this curly bracket with a variable actually using format. So now here we can do name. So what this does is it will take whatever's in the variable name and it will replace that where we see these curly brackets. So let's try running our new code. There we go. We got hello Akshan. Oh, you can't see the screen? Okay, let me reshare it. Can you see that now? The PyCharm screen? Peter, can you see it now or is it still not visible? Um, hmm. Let me stop sharing and try again. Okay, is it better now? Is there a problem for anyone else as well? Okay, okay, perfect. So, so the, do you see the third function? So in this we have a variable called name, right? And how this is different from the previous function is that instead of printing out a particular line every time, what we're doing is we're taking a variable from the user, which is name, and we're expecting it to be of type string because we do print hello and then these curly braces, and we can do dot format after that to replace these curly braces with name. So this will be hello Akshan, right? Does everyone understand how we got that printed over there and how these functions are working? I can repeat the last two functions if I went too fast. All right, so let's switch back over to the PowerPoint presentation. Yes, so notice here that the function name is after def, and inside the bracket we have the parameter. So functions are invoked or called using their name followed by parentheses. So we simply call the function name and put the parentheses, and in the parentheses we have to pass any required parameters or inputs. Yes, so if you try to run these two types of codes, they will run because this has one parameter and we're providing one parameter. So it simply prints these out. But when we try to run this code without a parameter, it will simply give us an error because we haven't supplied enough information for this function to work. Parameters are essentially inputs to a function that are used within a function. So the order matters. So the order in which you write the parameters matters. So I can show you a quick example of this. Let's do a new share. Mm, all right. So if we, for example, have, let's say, a division uh, function, we give them a and b. So we all know that we can't divide by zero. So if b is equal to zero, let's say return invalid, else return a divided by b. Right, that seems rather simple, right? So in this, how the order can matter is, for example, let's say we have division a, sorry, c comma d, and then we have print division d comma c. So these both should give us different answers, right? So anybody in chat want to quickly let me know what the answers will be over here? Just quick division. No guesses. So 1 by 2 and 2. Yes, that is correct, right? So we'll get 0.5, which is 2 divided by 4, and then 4 divided by 2, right? So let's try to run this, and that is exactly what we get. All right, so moving back to our PowerPoint presentation. So we are not allowed to repeat parameter names. So if you already, let's say you already said A's, you can't have another A as a parameter. Um, Instead of invoking with positional arguments, you can use keyword arguments. So let's see some examples of this. So order matters. So yeah, this is the same exact thing I was telling you about. So yeah, if you have 5 raised to the power 2, that will be different than 2 raised to the power 5. Repeated names not allowed, and display exponentiation. So we have base equal 10, exponent equal 2. So 10 raised to power 2 is equal to 100. So basically in this, what you can do is you can change the positions if you know what the what the parameter is called in the function. So let's see an example of this as well. Where'd it go? All right, can you see my PyCharm screen? All right. So now instead of this, let's try doing something different, right? So if we do print a equals c, b equals d, right? Okay, so it doesn't seem to like that. Oh, I never gave it a function. Okay, so a equals c and b equals d, right? Or maybe it doesn't like that, we can give it numbers. Okay, so that does work. So even though PyCharm seems to be getting this red, it does work. So another thing we want to do is b equals 4, comma. Okay, so does anybody want to take a guess about if this will give us the same answer or not? If these two lines give us the same answer? No guesses? Yes? Okay. So let me see. Yeah, we do get the same answer. So yeah, you can either use the variable names and then the order doesn't matter, right? So you can do a equal to b equals 4 in either order, and it will put it in the order that uh, it should be put in, corresponding to how you equated it, right? So you put a as 2, so it will go straight here and be like, oh, a is 2, and b is 4, so it will go straight to b and be like b is 4. It won't matter what the order is. But if you don't write these, then the order will be maintained. Then B will get 2 in the first case, oh, sorry, 4 in the first case and 2 in the second case, and vice versa for A, right? So that's something you want to be careful about. Naming parameters and using them is not something that is generally done, but it is something that is present there in Python and can be used. So let's go back to the presentation. All right. So parameters can have different values. Sorry. Parameters can have different values. Say hello and name is equal to world. So this is the same function that we made. If a parameter is given a default value, it becomes optional when invoking the function. So we can give it a default value like this. So let's see how that exactly works. All right, so we have this. All right, so we had hello name. So what we can do is we can give it a default value, right? And now every time, now what we can do is we can do hello and without parentheses. Sorry, without the parentheses filled, we still need the parentheses, or we can write somebody's name, right? So if we try to run this, yeah, both of these work. What is this none about? Okay, well, anyways, so yeah, that is how default values work in a function. Does everyone understand what I did here? We simply put an equal to sign and then we say what the default value is. So when we call the function without parameter, it will take that particular value. But when we give it a value, then it will overwrite that value, right? So new share, back to PowerPoint. If creating a function with both required and optional parameters, define required parameter first and optional parameters last. So if you have a function that has one parameter that is required and the other one that has a default value and is not required, then you want to place the one that can have a default value at the end and the one without default value in the start. So this is wrong because we had uh, the greeting equal to hello before name, but this has name before greeting equals to hello. So this is completely fine. And this is how the function will be used. So one value will always be required, but the second one is optional. So return statement, as mentioned previously, when we're making a function, most of the times our objective is to return a particular value to the user. So functions without a return statement always return none, right? So that is why we were getting none after the print statements. Functions with a returnable, sorry, functions with a return statement return the value specified after the return keyword, which can be stored in a variable. So note output printed to the console via the print function. So if you want to go back to the piece of code I just wrote, right? So over here, we were getting none over here because I was trying to print what was being outputted by this function. But because hello function doesn't return anything, it simply just sent us a none. And we were printing before that within the function itself, which is where this line came from. So this none was actually being printed because of this line. We could have simply done oh, this, and it would have printed out the statement without that none over there. So if we try to run this again, oh, there we go. So that is why we were getting null values over there. So moving back to the PowerPoint presentation. Yes, so functions with a return statement return the value specified after the return keyword, which can be stored in a variable. So this is the same thing we did in our add function. So we have f equals add c comma d, right? And that is how we are using the function. So let me show you this again just to refresh your memory. Right, so we had add nums over here. So what we did was we did print, no, not print, we did f equals add nums, and then we can have two numbers, so 4 3, right? So when we have a return statement, whatever is being returned will be stored into this variable. Is that clear how we're storing the return value into the f variable? If it's not, please let me know in the chat. Otherwise, I'm going back to the presentation. We have, um, sorry, give me 1 second. I'll be right back. So return statement, you can return multiple values with a single return by separating them in return values. So, so let's look at this quick example. So define get integer quotient and remainder. So this returns the dividend, or it returns divisor dividend divided by divisor. Oh, sorry, this is my bad. So it returns the dividend divided by the divisor, which is our quotient. And then the remainder is dividend modulus divisor, right? So this will be returned in the form of a tuple, sorry. So if you try to equate this to a variable, it will get a tuple with the values 3 comma 1 if you're trying to, for example, divide 10 and 3, right? So you can also unpack these by assigning multiple variables. So you can have quotient comma remainder equal to this function, and both of them will get their respective values then. This again is position specific. So if the position of the left one is quotient and the right one is remainder, you can't swap these out. So documentation strings. So this is something that is really not really adding much to the code in terms of functionality, but it adds more in terms of readability and how we're going to express to someone how our function is going to be used, right? So if someone is reading your code, they should be able to immediately tell what your code is doing. So what we do is we use triple quotes, as you can see over here, right? So between these triple quotes, you can write as much lines as you want. So typically you want to have a general description of it, then you want to have the arguments that this function will take, and then the values that this function will be returning. So if greeting in, for example, these values return uh, this formatting, right? So this is the same exact function, but all this does is it checks if the greeting that has been supplied is in one of these greetings, and if it is, it returns this value, right? So all we're doing is describing this function in these green lines. So function to build a greeting to a user using arguments. So we have arguments. The first argument is name. So param is just the way we write it, right? A string representation of a user's name. So let's try to make some documentation for uh, uh, our add function, let's say. All right, so let's switch over to PyCharm. I'm going to make this quick. So we got triple quotes, right? So this will already be in here for you. So you can say sum of two numbers, right? That's the description of the name. So first number, this is the second number, and we're returning the sum of A and B, right? So it's as simple as that. This immediately just makes my code 100% readable. This is an easy function, so the person would have been able to tell whether or not what this is being used for. But in the case that you're doing something complex, these doc strings are really useful. So the person doesn't need to go through the entire function. They can simply just know what your function is performing. Let's go back to the PowerPoint. So functions have a special attribute with the value of the doc string that you entered when defining the function. Use this attribute to learn about new functions. So if you do print get user greeting dot doc, even like for all user defined functions or for functions defined uh, by someone who wrote the Python code like years ago, you can still access their doc strings and read exactly what they meant their function to do, right? So if you simply need to do print, then followed by the name of the function and dot, and then double underscore doc double underscore, and it should give you this functionality. So scope is something that I was talking about earlier, right? So actually, let me see how much is left. Okay, so I'm going to be continuing scope in the next lecture since I was late today, right? So in tomorrow's function, we will be starting with scope, and we will be going into the next lecture within that period. Also, the homework can be delayed one more week. You can submit the homework 1 week late as we did not finish all the topics that we were going to be covering today.